Hi, I'm Christy Damio, and Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick was my father. My father had an amazing amount of charisma. So most of my best memories of him were of him bringing people together. He had this amazing ability to create community. So at my birthday parties, he'd have kids singing songs, or sometimes he brought me on stage at concerts with people like Pete Seeger, who I didn't even know was famous at the time. And he had this charm that made everyone sing along and made everyone... He started a coffee house where he had open mics, and it would draw people in to listen to folk music, but also they would plan protests and actions when there were things they wanted to change in their community. People just loved him. He did teach me a lot of folk songs and a lot of what I think he would have called freedom songs. There were a lot of songs that he wrote that were about the civil rights movement, and that he'd written while he was, doing all of the things that he was doing. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. By the time he was my dad, it was the 70s in New York City, and nonviolence was who he was. He had become a bodyguard for Dr. King. He was vegan. It was just a really different atmosphere. When he was a member, and I think a founding member of the Deacons for Defense, it's a thing I learned about later by reading articles about him. My understanding is that they were necessarily not nonviolent. And I don't think that's a thing he would have told a little kid very much about. But my understanding is that they were not all really deacons and ministers, but that they called themselves that because it sounded pretty harmless, and that he was a person who would drive around in his car late at night with a bunch of other, he was a minister, with a bunch of other guys who, many of them were ministers, and patrol the area to protect African-American families from the Ku Klux Klan. Because the police at that time in that place in Louisiana were not protecting them.
Kirk was the longtime partner of my sister Claire and father to my niece Christy. I always spent a lot of time with my sister, so I met Kirk not long after she got to know him. I have a few favorite memories of Kirk. One is of him singing on stage at a protest rally, filling the air with his strong baritone voice, filling the stage with his 6'6" presence, his long African robes draping down around him. Another memory of Kirk is going with him to the Clearwater Festival, or the Great Hudson River Revival, a music environmental summer festival in Croton-on-Hudson that he was involved in organizing along with his friend and colleague, Pete Seeger. Maybe my favorite memory of Kirk is him playing with my niece Christy when she was a toddler and small child. Kirk seemed to be doing all of the things he could do to use his talents toward furthering the vision of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He sang at protest rallies, concerts, and music festivals, and recorded records. He organized his community coffee house. He worked on environmental issues through the Clearwater. He ran for president, traveling the country to get his message across. I admired Kirk's commitment to what he believed in and all of the ways he found to do the work he believed in to make the world a better place.
As he grew up, he studied plants and he made many useful things. He named him George Washington. George Washington.
Okay, I'm Herb Mack. I helped develop the Urban Academy, and I was the principal for quite a while. I was a high school teacher in Chicago, and it was just at the beginning of the civil rights movement. And I had friends who went south and became part of what was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And they used to go south, spend time in Mississippi, and sometimes as a rest period, they would come up and stay at the house. We got involved. We were running a high school program, Friends of SNCC, where the high school kids from about 10 different high schools came together, and we worked on the issue of segregation in Chicago's schools. That we had a boycott where all the kids, except in the very white schools, came out and didn't go to school for a day, and it got publicity. But we also had a support group to what was going on in Mississippi and the South, whereas we'd be called up by someone on SNCC staff and say, so-and-so is in jail in Tougaloo. And so we would then get the number of the Tougaloo jail and the Tougaloo Police Department, and we would have a series of calls saying, what's happening with Joe? What's happening with Joe? Because it was dangerous. You get arrested, you could get killed. We started, it must have been in 1960 or so, and it went till about 1965 or 66. And then Martin Luther King began to concentrate on Vietnam. And that really annoyed us because we felt we haven't solved one problem, what the hell are we going into another problem? But he had clout, and the focus became really on Vietnam. I mean, it was just hopeless because I agreed with the anti-war movement, but that wasn't where we were at. We needed to finish our job, and nobody was focused.
Frederick Kirkpatrick continued his work in activism and songwriting until his passing in 1986. The impact he had on the lives of those he knew will be remembered for years to come. He spent years dedicating his life to bettering the lives of African Americans and enforcing equality in America. He worked with many organizations, such as the Deacons for Defense and Justice and the SCLC, and had many friends in other groups, such as SNCC. Throughout his life, he worked hard to create the change he wanted to see in the world and contributed to the greater equality that we see in our world today.